Every NFL team wants to make the playoffs. That's the goal. At least in theory, this is true. The 1960s firmly tested this logic. As it turns out, if you do something dumb enough, you can make teams, players, and coaches want to have no part of the postseason. Before we had the Super Bowl, there was the Shit Bowl. I'm Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback, and today it's the story of the playoff game no team wanted to play.
Shit, I don't care either.
As 1959 turned into 1960, it was panic stations for the National Football League. The newly formed and soon to launch American Football League was threatening its very existence. Competition was not good. It was very scary. Visibility would become a crucial battleground between the two leagues. So when the upstart rival pulled the old end around on the NFL to sign a 5-year television contract with ABC that covered the entire league with revenue that would be shared, it took many by surprise. Up until this point, individual NFL teams had contracts with TV networks directly. Most of these by 1960 were held by CBS, but not all. Coverage was spotty, although the NFL would quickly reverse course and copy pretty much to a T what the AFL did ahead of the 1961 season, although they would sign their contract with CBS. Regardless, the NFL found itself in desperate need of more high-profile games that could be broadcast to a national audience. NBC was, of course, showing the NFL championship game from coast to coast across the country. CBS was broadcasting a few NFL games nationally, but there wasn't this regular television schedule of games nationally shown like there would be later on down the road. The patchwork collection of television contracts certainly did not make things easy. Needing television inventory that could be shown to a national audience that would appeal to all of America, newly installed NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle dusted off an idea his predecessor Bert Bell had first proposed. Before his untimely passing during the 1959 season, Bell had proposed an extra playoff game for the National Football League. This is far less exciting, far less sexy than it sounds, and we'll get to why in just a moment. In addition to fast-tracking the Dallas Cowboys expansion, the NFL did announce the second playoff game for the 1960 season and dubbed it the Bert Bell Benefit Bowl, although that name never really stuck. How exactly would the second playoff game work? Would the first place team, the team with the best record in the NFL, get a bye to the championship game, while the second and third place sides would play each other in a playoff game? That would have been great, but no. Instead, the NFL opted to have the second place team in the Eastern Division face off against the second place team in the Western Division in a postseason contest to determine who the third best side in pro football was for that season. Not only is that not a joke, but it's not even the dumbest element of the proposal. To understand that, we need to understand the NFL championship game at this time. The title contest was scheduled 2 weeks after the NFL regular season had ended, and almost always this date fell sometime between Christmas Day and New Year's Day on the calendar. The natural spot for this newly formed playoff game, if you needed to play it at all, would have been 1 week after the NFL regular season would end. The TV networks, though, they were not so interested in that time slot because they had more than enough Christmas specials to show during that week before the holiday. I mean, we're in the golden era of the television Christmas special, the 1960s. We're talking Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Peanuts, all of that good stuff. Who wants to show a third place playoff game between two teams who weren't good enough to play for the championship when you could show some outstanding Christmas program that would bring in huge revenue dollars? CBS was interested in broadcasting this game to a national audience, but not until the week after the NFL championship game. That meant that the NFL season concluded not with the crowning of a champion, but with the crowning of the best divisional runner-up. This is where the game gets its more commonly used name, the runner-up bowl, although it goes by so many different names. It's the Bert Bell Benefit Bowl, the runner-up bowl, the playoff bowl, the pro playoff bowl, and those are only the nice things people call it. Yeah, the runner-up bowl. With a money-making, excitement-generating name like that, who wouldn't want to take part in the NFL's second playoff game? Look, it wasn't all bad though. The game was held in Miami at the Orange Bowl. There are certainly worse places in the world to spend a January week in during the 1960s. There was also a guaranteed payout for players, which wasn't anything to sneeze at this point in history. Ultimately, the biggest feature of this playoff game, if you want to call it that, was the fact that 65% of all ticket revenue generated would go towards the players' pension fund, an oft-neglected and notoriously underfunded mechanism to assist retired pros. That being said, funding pensions and extra television revenue for the league, it wasn't really enough to get players and coaches and teams excited to play in this new playoff game. Despite that, the runner-up bowl was even more underwhelming than anyone could have predicted. In the build-up to the newly created NFL playoff game, Orange Bowl officials had estimated that 50,000 people would turn out. Pete Rozelle, the commissioner, wasn't as bullish in his prediction, but believed more than 40,000 paying fans would show up. The official gate, 34,981, below both estimates, and really kind of just a disappointment to anyone involved. On the field, the game was played? I mean, there isn't much more to say about it than that. The score would finish in favor of the Detroit Lions, who beat the Cleveland Browns by a final score of 17-16, but it's safe to say neither team was particularly bothered by the result. The first 3 seasons of the runner-up bowl could have simply been called the Detroit Lions Invitational. They would finish as runner-up to the Green Bay Packers in 1960, 1961, and 1962. Their reward for this consistency? A trip to Miami to play in the playoff game no one wanted to be at. Detroit actually did a runner-up bowl three-peat, knocking off the Eagles in 61 and then the Steelers in 1962. One of the more interesting runner-up bowl or playoff bowl trends I have spotted, and it started in 1962. I couldn't find footage of the games in 1960 or 1961, but in every game I did find footage of, at the end of that game, fans would run onto the field. They would storm the field after the game. I have spent an inordinate amount of time trying to process why anyone would do this, and I got nothing. This is a game to determine the NFL's third best team at a neutral site a week after the season had really ended. What reason could you or anyone else have for wanting to storm the field, most likely to celebrate a game featuring 2 teams you didn't really care all that much about? Honestly, I'd have been embarrassed to even been there. Okay, that's not true. I drive from Sacramento to Stockton on a weekday night just to watch Pacific Tigers basketball, but I would never ever try to get on the court after the game. Alright, yeah, one time I did try to walk on the UOP basketball court after the cooling off period ended. Look, you know what? I'm just going to admit it. I'm no better than these people storming the field of the runner-up bowl. So be it. I will come to terms with that. Moving on. The Lions three-peat was followed by Vince Lombardi going on a one-man crusade to destroy whatever credibility the game may have had, which wasn't all that much. In the 1963 edition of the runner-up bowl, which was now also being called the Pro Playoff Bowl, Green Bay rushed out to a 21-3 lead over the Cleveland Browns. Eventually, they would win by a final tally of 40-23. It is safe to say Lombardi did not particularly enjoy his time in Miami, victory or not. He would go on to call the game the Shit Bowl and label it a loser's game for losers. The joke, though, was on Lombardi when a year later he found himself right back swimming in the shit bowl once again, this time facing off against the historically hapless St. Louis Cardinals, making what was for them a rare postseason appearance. Clearly not wanting to be there and not particularly motivated by Lombardi's rant from the following season, Green Bay suffered an embarrassing defeat at the Orange Bowl. If that was not bad enough, Lombardi threw an epic temper tantrum on his way out of town, calling the game a hinky-dink football game held in a hinky-dink town, played by hinky-dink players. That's all second place is, hinky-dink. Not to be a pedant here, Vince, but you were actually fourth place and you were playing in a game to determine the third place side of the NFL. Anyway, this was sort of rich. This rant was rich coming from a team that had just lost. Worst of all for Lombardi is he damn near ended up back in the runner-up bowl for a third year running in 1965. A tie for the Western Division that season saw Green Bay and the Baltimore Colts face off in a rare playoff tiebreaker. The winner would go on to the NFL Championship game. The loser got a bye week and then headed on down to Miami for a trip to the Losers Bowl or the Shit Bowl or whatever derogatory name Lombardi wanted to refer to it as. The Packers would squeak by the Colts in overtime thanks to a missed field goal that was for some reason called good by the referee. Don Chandler rule, look it up. This allowed Lombardi to avoid another appearance in the runner-up bowl. The Colts were led by legendary head coach Don Shula, who was extremely annoyed to not be playing in the NFL championship game that season. So much so that he actually had his team put in effort and care for the playoff bowl matchup coming up. They went into this fixture on a mission, and the result was a total annihilation of the Cowboys in what was the highest attended game in runner-up bowl history. While the Colts were out practicing and working out game plans and trying to win a game that was essentially meaningless, the Dallas Cowboys were out having the time of their lives. In his book, The Dallas Cowboys, The Outrageous History of the Biggest, Loudest, Most Hated, Best Loved Football Team in America, Joe Nick Patowski wrote Dallas players were down at the dog tracks in Miami and getting hammered at the bar in the team's hotel throughout their entire time leading up to the playoff bowl. Knowing that, the scoreline in favor of the Colts is not all that surprising. During the summer of 1966, the AFL-NFL merger would be announced, and this probably should have been the logical end of an unnecessary playoff game that no one wanted to play. The advent of the AFL-NFL championship game meant the NFL championship game was now a de facto playoff game. Really, it just made the playoff bowl sort of redundant and unnecessary, not that it hadn't been for its entire existence anyway. No one bothered to tell that to the NFL, however, who plowed on with this much unloved tradition. It did keep its place on the calendar, being played the week after the NFL championship game, although it made a little more sense now because the AFL-NFL championship game was played a week after that, or 2 weeks after the NFL championship game. So it went NFL championship game, also the AFL championship game, playoff bowl, and then the newly created AFL-NFL championship game. All things considered, the 1966 edition of the Playoff Bowl was still kind of successful. Attendance was strong. The game between the Baltimore Colts and the Philadelphia Eagles was fairly competitive. It was just about everything you could hope for from this type of postseason contest. Baltimore did eventually go on to beat Philadelphia, securing their second straight runner-up bowl title. From here, the runner-up bowl just falls off a cliff. In 1967, the NFL would go from 2 divisions to 4 divisions, which meant the game needed to be revamped to accommodate all of this. The newly formed NFL playoff structure meant there would be 2 conference championship games that would lead to the NFL championship game, and the winner of that, of course, would go on to the NFL AFL championship game. Instead of just having 2 runners-up randomly play each other a week after the season ended, the NFL was going to make the 2 losing teams from the conference championship round face each other in this time slot. It turns out the NFL playoff game no team wanted to play could somehow get even more meaningless than it had already been. Attendance plummeted as no one really cared about watching 2 teams coming off losses play for nothing a week after the NFL championship had been determined. The Los Angeles Rams would go on to win the 1967 runner-up bowl, but it wasn't like they were trying all of that hard. Head coach George Allen had extended curfew for his teams, and players have freely admitted they didn't really care what happened on that day. The Cowboys would be the best of the playoff losers in 1968 in a game that had all of the passion and intensity of a modern day Pro Bowl. Well, apart when it was time for the Minnesota Vikings to help an injured player get off the field, and then they did so in the most brutal way imaginable. That's your teammate, fellas. Come on. Also, you're not playing for anything. This is the playoff bowl. Like, show some care, guys. Oh, man. The last playoff bowl would be won by the Rams in 1969, who crushed the Cowboys 31-0 in a game no one really remembers or cares about. By 1970, the AFL and NFL merger was complete. The future of the playoff bowl was mulled for a while. A couple people had pondered about or suggested having the runner-up in the AFL and the runner-up in the NFL championship games play each other, but there was just no appetite to do this. There were plenty of real playoff games at this junction, and by and large, the league had itself enough television coverage to be happy. Keeping up this charade really served no purpose. The legacy of the playoff game no team wanted to play is, well, there is no legacy. The NFL has since worked to really just erase this game off the face of the earth, going so far as to reclassify it as an exhibition. Stats and results are not counted towards anything. The runner-up bowl at this stage was no better than a pre-season matchup. Utterly and completely meaningless. No matter if you want to call it the Bert Bell Benefit Bowl, the Playoff Bowl, the Runner-Up Bowl, or as Vince Lombardi so lovingly called it, the Shit Bowl, this mistake is proof you can, in fact, make NFL teams not want to be a part of the playoffs. You just have to do something really stupid to get there. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to learn about how a startup football league basically ended the NFL's premier dynasty of the 1970s, well, you can check out the video in the upper right hand corner of your screen. Until next time, I am Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback, and as we say around here, hashtag take it out to the 25.